Welcome everyone to this investor call for Cassini Resources, who today have announced a proposed transaction with Oz Minerals Limited. Cassini Managing Director Richard Bevan will run through a presentation, and at the end of the presentation you'll be able to submit questions via the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Richard?
Thanks, David, and thanks everyone. Thanks for your time this morning to kind of run you through the proposed transaction and I guess some of its highlights. So I'll be using this based off the presentation that was lodged on the ASX this morning. Probably won't be exactly the same, but the content will largely be in there. So if I can get this to work, we'll be right. Standard disclaimer. So I guess a little bit about the transaction. I mean, the way that we've approached this is functionally it's an asset sale. So it'll be done in a way that's sort of most efficient, I guess, in terms of preserving value for Cassini shareholders. But Oz will effectively take control of the West Musgrave project, and we will spin out all the other assets, being the Yarawindah Brook and Mount Squires exploration projects, into a new company that will look to list on the stock exchange. So obviously the consideration up front is 15 cents in Oz script at the exchange ratio 1 share per 68.5 Oz share per 68.5 Cassini shares, and also 1 cent in cash that will be paid as a return on capital from the existing cash in Cassini. So I think if you look at some of the premiums, they're obviously excluding the shares in CASPIN, or the new proposed spin-out company. And you know, I guess if you look at this deal and you look at it as a pure scheme, you look at those premiums. The reality for us is that the premium, or the share price that we've had over the last couple of months, a lot of it's been driven by the Yarawindah Brook project, and that's really coming with Cassini shareholders into Ni-Cu. Apart from the upfront consideration, there's also a contingent consideration, which is really an earn-out right over if Oz sale or divest any of the project over the next 10 years, which will give that right will be held by CASPIN, by the new company, and will allow us some exposure to any sort of value uplift that Oz achieve over the next period of time. So in terms of what the demerged entity looks like, so CASPIN, as it's being called, will have the Yarawindah Brook project, which is obviously you know, in the really exciting emerging sort of New North Sea nickel province. It'll be funded or seeded with $500,000 worth of cash that'll assist it through the IPO process. And then we'll look that CASPIN will look to list on the exchange. CASPIN will also hold that right to that earnout when Oz divests, and all the Cassini shareholders will get a pro rata distribution of CASPIN shares. So with the transaction, the board have recommended the transaction in the absence of a superior offer. We've obviously engaged with our major stakeholders. So some of those key shareholders have signed voting intents. So it's about 17.3% of the shareholder base, or sorry, 17.4% of the shareholders have signed those voting intentions. We've engaged more broadly with that shareholder group, and you know, there's a group of key shareholders which probably represent about 40 to 50% of the register, who are all supportive of the transaction. So, you know, we've really got a lot of support from the shareholders. So with the announcement today, we go into preparing the IER and the scheme booklets, and the scheme booklet looks, the aim is to post that out late in August with a shareholder meeting to put it in front of the shareholders sort of late September. And then if that all goes according to plan, the transaction would complete late September, early October. So perhaps just to run you through, I think everyone's reasonably familiar with our asset portfolio. Obviously the joint venture with the West Musgrave, and then the earlier stage exploration projects that with Mount Squires we own 100%, and Yarawindah we're in an 80% joint venture with. So the proposed transaction structure, you can see the current structure on the left there, with Cassini owning 30% of the West Musgrave. And as I said, functionally, it's an asset sale where Oz will take the 30% interest in the West Musgrave project. CASPIN will own those two other assets that are currently sitting within Cassini. And obviously, Cassini shareholders will have a pro rata distribution into CASPIN. And then CASPIN will look to list in its own right. So the consideration's got a couple of components. I guess there's the 15 cents per share in Oz script. There's a 1 cent capital return, which makes the total sort of upfront consideration at about 16 cents for Cassini shareholders. And then there's the pro rata sort of share spin out. So as I said, CASPIN will hold the contingent consideration, which is the earn-out right if Oz sell the asset. It'll hold the Yarawindah Brook and it'll hold Mount Squires. So we're looking at, without being able to put a value on that pro rata share in CASPIN, we're looking at really a 16+% value for shareholders. And we're really excited about that demerged entity and the opportunity that provides. It gives us 100% control of our destiny in a new entity at a time when, both those projects exhibit a fair bit of upside opportunity. This graph, I guess, is really just to demonstrate where the premium is. And the way that we view this is really Cassini is, with the West Musgrave project, has tended to track around that sort of, 8-9 cents per share. You can see even after the West Musgrave PFS was released, we're around that mark. Everyone had a dip in March with COVID, but really a lot of that share recovery has been based around the interest in Yarawindah, the success of Chalice with their Julimar prospect, and some of the exploration work that we've been doing. And the great thing for Cassini shareholders is that that will follow them into CASPIN. So I think if you look at the implied offer price and the premium to where the project, the West Musgrave project, the implied value of the West Musgrave project in Cassini, that really gives you a better idea of the premium. So I think I've sort of run through most of this. I think, we think it is an attractive premium. I think it gives Cassini shareholders an immediate exposure to the value in the West Musgrave. There are risks associated with being a minor party in a large project like this, really around project timeline and funding. Oz have become a bit more open over the last few months around their concern around their exposure to the nickel, and really they have, I guess, become a little bit more risk off on the nickel in the last 6 months, and that proposed a risk for Cassini, and that was part of the decision, I guess, in terms of considering this offer. The good thing is getting Oz script that if Cassini shareholders want to remain and have some exposure to the West Musgrave project, they can do that via through their Oz script. And Oz is obviously a very well performing mid-tier company and less risk in their script than there is in the junior developer. If people want to trade that script, it'll be easily tradable, on the ASX, and I think it creates a lot of optionality for our shareholders going forwards. So perhaps just to reinforce a little bit about CASPIN, because obviously this is the exciting part for Cassini shareholders, and we think there's a lot of leverage to this new entity going forwards. As I said, it'll hold the projects. It'll be seeded with $500,000 of cash from Cassini, and that'll assist it get listed. It is in that really emerging new North Sea nickel province. And as soon as this transaction is complete, and over the next few months, we'll be working forward to get that entity listed in conjunction with meeting all the regulatory requirements from the ASX. So with respect to the transaction, the first court hearing is scheduled for sort of mid-August. Booklets out, scheme booklets out to shareholders late in August. And then the scheme meetings, of which there are a number of parts to this transaction. There's an acquisition scheme, there's a demerger scheme, and a capital reduction. All those meetings will be held on the same day, anticipated to be late September. and then a second court hearing shortly thereafter, with targeting sort of an implementation or completion date early October. So perhaps a little bit about CASPIN. Some of these slides are familiar from our Yarawindah slides. We're obviously, you know, we've got a significant land holding in a really emerging part of an exciting exploration area close to Perth. The Yarawindah project, you know, we've shown it's got the same host rocks as the Julimar nickel discovery, which is about 40 kilometres to the south. And I think we're well placed with a strong technical team who have actually been working on this project for about 18 months since we've been involved. And then we've got a lot of IP and expertise from a very similar system in the West Musgrave to apply to this project. So traditionally, Yarawindah's had some broken exploration. It's traditionally been a PGE or a platinum palladium prospect. We've, over the past 18 months, sort of changed the paradigm in the way that we think about this based on what we know from the West Musgrave. And really that platinum palladium we're using as, I guess, a pathfinder or an associated mineralisation to what we see as a potential nickel and copper system. It's a reasonably big system. You know, some of these host intrusions that we've intersected to date are sort of 50 metres thick with anomalous nickel and copper. It's still at the early stages for this project, but we think the potential and upside is quite material. I think the interesting thing for us, or the exciting thing, is that it's become quite a large-scale opportunity. We've added some more land holding to this project. A lot of the work we've done initially was around the prospect level, but we've now, through some of the work that we've done, shown that there's a lot more of this project area that's prospective. And we're now systematically going through and sort of identifying some of those future targets, and that will form obviously part of the opportunity for CASPIN as it lists. The good thing is that we've already vectored in on some massive sulfides. We've had some good hits, or you know, of reasonably high-grade nickel and copper mineralisation, although they are reasonably thin at this point. It's shallow, so which means it's a good chance of being economic. And I think the targeting from here on in is really just take those sniffs we've got around that massive sulfide mineralisation and progress those as we go forwards. The other project that's formed part of the Cassini portfolio for a while and will roll into CASPIN is the Mount Squires project. It's quite an interesting project. It's got two sort of elements to it. You know, we've got a very prospective gold trend to the sort of the western edge of the project that's had some early drilling that we have as well. Oh, sorry. And we actually had intended to be on the ground out there in March doing some more exploration work, but obviously this part of the country is being closed and sort of remains closed to exploration companies. So there's a great opportunity for a large-scale greenfield gold project, once again, that's reasonably underexplored. But it's also contains an extension of the sort of nickel and copper mineralisation that forms the heart of the West Musgrave project. So One Tree Hill, which is quite adjacent to the tenement border, we had a discovery about 18 months ago with some good hits of copper, sort of 40 metres at 1.2. And we now know through the work that we've done that nickel and copper mineralisation extends into that Mount Squires project. And that will be another focus for some exploration work going forwards. So we look, we'll be able to get out on the ground, we expect later this year with Mount Squires, but once again, we've got some targets that are ready to drill. And we think there's a great opportunity to add further value, not only through Yarawindah, but through Mount Squires. So two really good exploration projects with what we believe is a lot of upside and leverage for CASPIN going forwards. So just to summarise, we're obviously actively exploring. CASPIN gives us the chance to take some of these assets that we have control over in terms of 100% ownership, get on the ground out there. There are targets to be drilled. They're both in good commodities and good precincts. Because CASPIN will also have the right to this contingent payment or this earn-out payment going forwards. and we'll see how that transpires. But I think there's a good chance that Oz will look to do something with the asset over the next period, and if they do, that's an opportunity for us. And a lot of the experienced technical team will flow on into CASPIN and take that IP and understanding of those systems. We've proven, we've had a number of good new discoveries in the West Musgrave, and there's a lot of value that team can add. So that's about it. So I'd like to just open it up through David for any questions that people have got. So David, over to you.
Thanks, Richard, for a great presentation. There was one question that did come in relating to the board and management of CASPIN. Has that been established yet, or is that something that will evolve as you get closer to the ASX listing?
Yeah, look, it is something that will evolve, but the intent is that the management and technical team will flow through to CASPIN. Obviously, CASPIN's a slightly different beast. It'll be even though Cassini is lean, it'll probably be an even leaner beast. But the intention is, we think there's a lot of value in that technical team, and whilst it hasn't been discussed, it's, there's a very obviously it's the intention that a number of those members will flow on to CASPIN.
And looking at the West Musgrave project, the DFS, has that been impacted at all by travel restrictions or COVID-19?
Yeah, it has, and I think Oz will come out with an updated timeline around this. That land has been closed since March. The government has only recently given that the green light, but we're not back on the ground out there, or Oz aren't back on the ground out there. I think that's something that will form discussions between the community and Oz over the next couple of months. I think it's going to be sort of later this year, probably Q3, before they would even think about getting on the ground out there. So, that is going to impact the timeline of the project. And I think that was a consideration for us with recommending this offer and putting it to shareholders, just the risk associated with this project moving sideways. Currently, production is not till 2025, and if there was significant slippage in that timetable, it really does make that benefit a fair way out.
And the most recent drilling on the southern projects that you have closer to home that will come into CASPIN, there was some elevated PGEs. Does that make you believe that it's much more than a nickel project, or much more than a base metals project, that it's a sort of a Ni-Cu-PGE project?
I think absolutely. I mean, I think historically most of the exploration at Yarawindah has been around the platinum palladium, and there's actually an uncompliant sort of 2004 resource there. I think from what we know, we think there's a larger opportunity there, and quite often there's, as we've found in the West Musgrave, there's these PG halos around a nickel sulfide ore body. So we're using, I guess, that PGE anomalism as a way of vectoring in and targeting some high grade or massive sulfide nickel and copper. And
will work continue on Yarawindah while the transaction's moving forward?
Yeah, it will. We've still got we've got some results due out over the next couple of weeks with assays coming in. There's some more targeting work that needs to be done, and there's some work behind the scenes, I guess, in terms of just access agreements to some of the new ground that we've pegged in Yarawindah. So that will go forwards, and the technical team will generate a number of sort of new targets, I guess, over the next couple of months. And I think that what that means is that hopefully when CASPIN hits the boards, that we've got some momentum and a couple of material targets to go and test.
And in terms of the valuation around the transaction, what was the methodology used to get to the number?
Look, I think we had we each obviously had independent advice as to what that project was worth. We viewed that in the current environment, that was probably a fair and reasonable valuation for the project. Oz probably thought it was a bit lower, and we probably thought it was a bit higher, the usual scenario. But I think, I think relative to the value we've been able to get in our share price for the asset, there's always been that risk around how does Cassini fund it going forwards. You're a small company, there's a big capex. We would have been reliant on either some support from Oz around the funding, So I think for us, it was, the reason for putting it to shareholders is really giving them an opportunity to assess, well, do they want to receive some immediate value now and mitigate some of that risk, or would they prefer to stay in and keep going?
And in terms of CASPIN itself, there'll be a period from sort of when you delist, I suppose, and then relist. How will shareholders be able to be kept abreast of the activity that you'll be doing during that time?
I think hopefully it won't be too long a period. I think the aim is during this period of as the scheme process runs from now through till sort of early October, there will also be the ramp up of CASPIN. So even though it won't come into creation until the demerger is all approved by shareholders, a lot of that work will go in now so that we'll be well positioned to keep that time to a minimum between the completion of the scheme and the rebirth of CASPIN. And we'll be looking to keep investors updated. Obviously, Cassini shareholders will roll into CASPIN, but we'll be looking to IPO that company, so we will need to raise new capital. So we'll be out there, keeping people abreast of the opportunity.
I do remind everyone that if you do want to ask a question, we've got through a number of them, but there is still the ability to ask questions through the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. So feel free to put any more questions to Richard. But Richard, in terms of sort of the feedback to date, I suppose, which is the first pass, what's been the feedback from those who've contacted you, either shareholders or other stakeholders?
Yeah, look, it's actually been really positive. I think it's not a straightforward scheme. Usually in a scheme, you're sort of divesting some non-core assets or some assets that the bidder doesn't want. So that's why I think to look at it as a functional asset sale is important. But we've had very positive feedback both from investors. From existing shareholders. Obviously, a large block of the shareholding is supportive of the transaction. And, anyone who's bought shares in the last, couple of years has probably made a good return and has the upside of being able to have continued exposure to some of these projects, such as Yarawindah.
Well, Richard, we have no further questions. I think the presentation and the Q&A element have answered seemingly what everyone wants to know. So I think on that note, I'll let you say a final goodbye to the shareholders and leave them with a message, and then we'll end the meeting here. Yeah, thanks, Dave. Look, thanks everyone for their time. If anyone has any questions or further queries, feel free to contact me and we'll keep you up to date with what happens over the next few months. And we look forward to not only getting a successful outcome for our shareholders, but we're also looking forward to CASPIN and the continued opportunity to create value. Well, thanks, Richard. Thanks everybody for tuning in. A copy will be available in the next few hours via the usual channels for Cassini shareholders. But Richard, thanks for your time. Thanks, Dave. Cheers. Thanks, everyone.